Well, hello to all of you future educators out there. So for class today, I am going to be talking about post-traumatic stress disorder in children. So as we're all going into the teaching profession and going through the teaching courses and everything that we need to do to become these wonderful educators, as we are learning, there are many things that are put on our plate besides teaching children math and science and reading and writing. And some of those things are dealing with children with exceptionalities and with disabilities and different things that can make it a little bit more challenging for them. And one of those things would be children dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. That is what Ptsd stands for. And this is a topic that is a little bit near and dear to my heart. And so today I'll be touching base on different things as far as what teachers can do, what some of the causes to this can be, some of the warning signs, classroom strategies, treatments, and different resources for teachers and families and children and anybody affected by it can use. So a little bit of background on post-traumatic stress disorder is a lot of times it is affiliated with just abuse or neglect. But a traumatic event can sometimes be caused by things that are unpreventable or unforeseen or not purposeful, such as a car accident. Or there are also things like a series of events that could be essentially a traumatic event, such as something going untreated or just a lot of things in life that someone necessarily feels they don't have a say in, or that a struggle that they feel alone in. But let's start from the beginning before I get ahead of myself here. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder in the classroom. How do we see it? How do we find out about it? How do we help children with it? So let's start with the causes. Some of the causes are neglect. And neglect, according to the Department of Human Health Services, of all of the reported cases, half of the cases that were reported in the midst of or in the realm of neglect, half of them were found to be true. So as a teacher, and as you're going back and forth between you think that a student may have neglect and you don't know whether you should report it or not, remember that statistic, that half of the cases that were reported were found to have been in a situation guilty of neglect. And approximately 7 in 1,000 children experience neglect in their home or in their life or in some realm. And neglect could include things as not being fed, not being cared about, not having what they need in life. And as a child, the only people that you have to give you those things are the adults in your life. And so if you're not getting that from your home environment, and as a teacher, it's definitely our job to look for those things in students, because if they don't have the adults in their home and they come to school and we push those things off, then they don't have us, then who do they have to lean on and to support and to count on to help give them a fulfilled life, or a life that they can be successful in, a life that they can take those worries away from and essentially be able to learn. A child going through neglect and just trying to always figure out where their next meal is going to come from, how they're going to clothe themselves, being the smelly one because they can't shower at home, so nobody wants to play with them because they smell bad. It's our job to help those children come to school and know that they're going to be taken care of if they're not taken care of at home. So neglect is one of the first causes. And an interesting thing with neglect, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, is of all of the causes, so neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological maltreatment, freak accident, car accidents, loss of a loved one, unidentified, untreated struggle or diagnosis of something such as ADHD. Neglect is actually the least reported by teachers and educators. Isn't that interesting? So, although of all of these things, of all of these causes in being reported, neglect is the most, when it's reported, it's found guilty the most, but yet it is the least reported. So that makes me a little bit curious in myself as to how many children go unnoticed because I don't have quite enough proof to justify my reason to report this child, or to report that I think this child might be neglected. Because with neglect, the warning signs of it are a little bit more here and there. But what a huge impact neglect has on a child. What a huge impact it has on their education. What a huge impact it has on their futures, on their success. It's just something that I wanted to take a little bit more time to make note of in looking at post-traumatic stress disorder, because neglect is huge. Just think about if you get neglected by your mom for a day, for any reason, how it affects you. Now think about being that neglected child, and because they didn't come to school with a bruise on their arm or serious issues, they kind of went unnoticed for a long time, and over that time it really had effects on their brain and on their development and all that stuff. So enough on that. I don't mean to go off on a tangent there, but just as you go into education, as you become teachers, I just thought that maybe you want to take more time to think about that and not be afraid to report it. You'll never have anybody come after you for reporting anything. But in the chance that a child might be going through neglect at home, don't be afraid to report those things. So next would be physical abuse, and this one is a little bit more obvious. This is hitting and physical abuse. Just kind of as it says. And some of the warning signs for this would be, if a child comes to school in the middle of summer in long pants and a sweatshirt, if a child's coming in clothes that cover a lot of their skin a lot of the times, even in times that it's not so normal, such as in the middle of summer, this is something to look for in physical abuse. Sexual abuse is another one that children sadly often have with post-traumatic stress disorder. It's one that we don't like to talk about. It's a shame, but it does happen, and it's something that we do need to be aware of as educators. Bouncing back to physical abuse for just a minute, I just want to touch base on this statistic by the U.S. Department of Health. About 2 in 1,000 children unfortunately experience physical abuse. So remember, neglect was 7 in 1,000. Physical abuse is about 2 in 1,000. Sexual abuse is about 1 in 1,000 children. And about 1/10 of the reports received by educators, about 1/10 of them are found to be sexually abused. So about 1/10 of the reports are found, there's finding found in the report, and it doesn't add up to nothing. And then psychological maltreatment. And this is another one, kind of like going back to neglect, that gets shoved under the rug a little bit. It's a little bit harder to diagnose and treat, or to kind of get enough findings to want to report it as a teacher, just because all of our students come in with different personalities and different backgrounds and parents and cultures and beliefs, that this one can be a little bit more tricky, which we'll touch base a little bit more on when we get up to warning signs here. But it is one that we still need to be aware of as educators and mindful and seek out a little bit, is looking for psychological maltreatment. And touching base on this too, freak accidents or car accidents, these are things that, because they're not a huge deal, because somebody didn't purposely do this to them, it kind of goes a little bit more unseen, but in post-traumatic stress disorder, but they can have a huge impact on kids, and they can make them a little bit more skittish, and so these are just things to be weary of, just to make the classrooms a little bit more comfortable and maybe slower pace for them, and as an educator to maybe just be more aware of in the sense of why a student may be acting the way they are for a little bit and not just chalk it up to them misbehaving. And then loss of a loved one is also a big one, especially of a parent or grandparent. This can have quite an impact on children, especially in the younger ages. And then unidentified or untreated struggle. So this would be an example of like a child having ADHD, and a child struggling with this, and it's not diagnosed and it's not treated, would kind of lead to a little bit of a series of unfortunate events. Maybe they're not getting their work done, maybe they aren't showing up on time, maybe they're getting off task a lot, and for those reasons they may have consequences at school, such as lower grades, or the teacher thinks that they're slacker, or they get a lot of negative feedback for that. And so then it kind of becomes a snowball effect, unfortunately for them. And that can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. So then it's like they just see themselves as failures, and why can't I get past this? And all of those negative events that have become affiliated with being untreated for something, or dyslexia, you can't read, well, try harder, well, read more books. Well, they just need to be someone to slow down and to see them a little bit and and understand their struggle a little bit more, to be able to get to the point, a healthy point where they can start dealing with that, which then in return start treating themselves for those traumatic events that they're becoming lodged in their brain and can be a little bit harder to shake and to treat, and to start moving forward in a healthy manner and making lots of progress in the education in their life in general. So let's talk about some of the warning signs now. So quick touching on the causes. Neglect. These are common ones. Remember, there are many, many, many reasons why somebody may experience post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a lot of traumatic events out there, but the common ones are neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological maltreatment, freak accidents such as car accidents, loss of a loved one, and an unidentified or untreated struggle, we'll call it. And some of the warning signs to look for in any of these would be physical markings, which we touched on with physical abuse. So anytime a child has a mark somewhere that you find unfit or suspicious. Behavioral issues. So when a child acts out, which I am going to read the list of behavior cues listed by the Department of Health Services, and they list them as aggression or opposition or defiant. They demonstrate fear of adults. And this is a big one as far as abuse goes, because if a child has fear of adults, even adults that they haven't met or adults that they're normally comfortable with, this is a huge, huge, huge red flag that needs to be made note of. They act out in an aggressive or disruptive behavior. Destructive to self or others. And destructive to self is a big one to notice. Children that are down on themselves a lot or very destructive towards themselves could be a child should never really have that. A child will not naturally develop those thoughts of themselves unless they are taught those thoughts of themselves. So if a parent or guardian or even a teacher is down on a child a lot, then that's what they'll tell themselves. Then that's kind of where psychological maltreatment may come in. So really make note of it if you do find that one of your students is down on themselves a lot. They arrive at school very early and then don't want to go home. So then if they're getting to school as early as they can and staying as long as they possibly can, clearly something's not going right if the child doesn't want to go home. Most children want to go home at the end of the day. Fearlessness or extreme risk-taking. And this is a hard one because, especially of the male gender, you're going to have a lot of students who, especially little boys, who are fearless. So that one's hard. That one is put in here really it's with a mixture of other things, and to an extreme. Very accident prone. And accident prone in the sense of has a lot of marks, has a lot of this, and is always very skittish. They cheat, steal, and lie. And these are red flags. I mean, as children grow up, they're going to steal their first pack of gum from the grocery store. Mom walks them back in, and you talk about you can't steal and stuff. But with a child, stealing food or cheating a lot or lying a lot, just to get through the day, to get through that assignment, to get through lunch, it becomes their protection, their way of getting through, because they have something bigger that they're dealing with. This cheat, this lie, and stealing this thing sadly becomes the small issue in their life. A low achiever, and this kind of relates back to the destructive to self. So they're low self-esteem, they're a low achiever, and it doesn't affect them because they don't matter. That's what they've been taught. Unable to form good peer relationships. Kids love playing with each other, they have great imaginations. When you have a student that really can't form peer relationships, we got a red flag going on. Clothing that covers body in warm months, so once again going back to the physical. Recessive and less mature behavior. And then this is an attention seeker, essentially. Dislike or shrink from physical contact, such as like a pat on the back or a handshake, good morning. If they're skittish and kind of shy away from that, that's another sign to just don't let those little things go unnoticed. So those are some of the behavior clues. Attendance and tardiness. Students that are very, very inconsistent, take note. And then the well-being of the child, just their clothing, and are they eating lunch, and are they bringing a lunch, are their basic needs being met? So say that you see some of these warning signs. Next I want to go into what a teacher should do to report this, and then what schools offer to help with these things. And then once you report it, what does the CPS process kind of look like? Just as an educator, I feel that it's important that everybody kind of knows a little bit what the process looks like. So let me grab a look here. So, as an educator, it is important that you do know that with any signs of PTSD, which this is just the result, this can be a result of any of these causes. But as an educator, if you have any inkling of neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or physical maltreatment in a child, you are legally mandated to report these things. If you do not report them and it is found later down the road and then found out that you did know about them, you can be in a lot of trouble. So just remember that it's not just your moral duty as a teacher, but it's actually your legal duty to be reporting these things and to be looking out for them and for the students. But anyways, then going off of that, the reports, so once you report it, who you report to? You will report to, each school should have, here we go. So when you get your first teaching job and you start teaching at your first school, a school legally needs to provide you a short training and the information of where to report these things in your state, where you need to report to, if in the sense of this happening with any of your students. And then most states, the report either goes to CPS, the state's Department of Social Services, or the State Department of Children and Youth Services. And then what you will fill out on the report, and these are just the most common, reports are going to be different. The child's name, age, gender, and address, the parent's name and address, the nature and extent of the injury or condition observed, prior injuries and when observed, actions taken by the reporter, such as talking with the child, where the act occurred, and the reporter's name, location, and contact information. And the contact information is important so when they open the investigation, they can ask you more questions or what you've seen and really get into that. And then once you have reported that, this is the CPS report process. This is what it looks like. So the identification, which is done through whoever reports it, and then the reporting, and then the intake. And when they take it in, they'll either screen it out, or it will go down to an initial assessment. And at initial assessment, it will either then be ruled out, or it will go down to a family assessment in which the family will be assessed. And then planning will be done, and this is where they'll make case plans, risk reduction plans for any of the risks that they found to the children. And then they'll create a timeline in which these things need to be resolved with the plan that they've created. And then they will service the progress, and they'll go, during that they'll be in and out of home services that are provided, that are foreseen as needed or not. And then that will either go back up, then it will go down to the evaluation of the family progress. So after that timeline, and that timeline that you create in the planning process, at the evaluation of family progress, if everything has been met and they think that everything's moving forward and there's no more risk, then they'll go down and to case closure. If things have not progressed how they want, they will go back up to planning and then go back down to service progress and evaluation of family progress. And if things still aren't going, then the case closure will, when it goes to assess the safety of the children, if the family still is not seen as fit for to keep a child safe, then further action will be taken, such as the children being taken out of the home. And different treatments and resources provided by schools that you can partake in would be sharing of information. Let families and students, everybody know about these resources and about the information that teachers are mandated reporters. Creating IEPs for students based off of the results of their PTSD. So whatever that may be, if that has got them behind in their education, IEPs are an amazing tool to help them get back to where they should be. Counseling in things such as speech, hearing and language therapies, behavioral management, special education, and healthcare. Schools have the abilities to provide all of those things to students. And then also treatments in schools, outside of school, there are different counselors. And one resource that I found that I really like, it is based out of Denver, but it's called the Third Way Center, and they provide individual, family, and group therapy, education, vocational training, parenting skills training, aftercare programs, and a lot more. So in very serious cases, that could be an outlet for somebody that, going all the way to Denver seems, but for somebody in the area, that's great. And there's also resources like that exist in all states. But that's one that I found that I really liked and I wanted to mention to everybody. And then there's also a lot of different links for families and educators on the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And it is under PTSD, National Center for PTSD. And there's a link under that's actually specifically for children and teenagers. So check that out. PTSD is such a broad spectrum that it's hard to define all of the causes, warning signs, treatments for each specific thing, because there are so many millions of things that can cause a traumatic event that someone holds on to. And so treatments are going to vary so much that to check out these resources and these links more specific to what type of traumatic event someone's going through.